speech enhance. Yeah.
Welcome you, sir.
So, shall we start?
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. I'm always pleased to present in front of colleagues and talk about uh, my work and to see some feedback from my colleagues. Today, we're going to talk about brain-computer interfaces, and we will start. Hold for a sec. We'll start. We'll start with brief introduction of Microsoft Research. This is the organization I came from. Then we'll discuss the big picture, the neuroscience, and where the brain-computer interfaces lay, what we have in the industry, and then we'll discuss various aspects of brain-computer interfaces in academia and in overall human-computer interfaces. And then I'll give you some examples from our research. Let me first talk a little bit about the company and the lab I came from. Microsoft Research was created in 1990 after a memo from Nathan Myhrvold, then Microsoft Chief Technology Officer, stating that Microsoft has to create its own research organization. And it was created in the year when Microsoft's overall revenue exceeded $1 billion. From our peers at the time, company with a similar revenue, no one created its own research organization, and no one is alive today. We believe that one of the factors of survivability and the progress Microsoft makes on the market is because of the steady stream of technologies coming from Microsoft Research. Since then, pretty much the organization, Microsoft Research, stays on three pillars. And the first is expand the state of the art in each of the areas we do research. Simply put, this means publishing scientific papers. And we do publish a lot. It's like academia. Publish or perish is a valid rule in Microsoft Research. The second pillar is rapidly transfer innovative technologies into Microsoft product, and this is because we are a research organization of a commercial company. And the last pillar is we have to ensure that Microsoft products have a future. This is the vision towards where we're heading, where computer science is heading, noticing the trends in our research areas, and also detecting on time disruptive technologies that might change the course of the markets. In Microsoft Research, everything is inside out. Microsoft development of new products is concentrated mostly in Redmond, Washington, in the United States, but we are spread all over the globe. Microsoft Research in Redmond is the oldest lab. Microsoft Research in Cambridge, in United Kingdom, is the second oldest lab. Microsoft Research Asia in Beijing is the second largest lab after Redmond. And as you can see, we have Microsoft Research in India, which is in Bangalore. The latest addition to Microsoft Labs is Microsoft Research Lab in Tokyo. And in this case, in this map, ATL is abbreviation of Advanced Technology Labs. And you can see that we have them spread all over the globe. We, as I mentioned, publish a lot. On the left chart, you can see the number of papers published by Microsoft researchers in artificial intelligence conferences from the years of 2000 to 2016. And you can see that in general we have published more papers than our competitors combined. This explains the explosion of Microsoft uh, technologies in the area of artificial intelligence today. On the right side, you can see the papers our researchers have published during ICASP over the years. So this is a sum for the last 6 years. And you can see that all, again, Microsoft has published the largest amounts of papers. Also, you can see that Microsoft in ICASP in 2023, he has the largest popularity. This was in Rhodos in Greece. But overall, not only doing research, but also sending those technologies, transferring those technologies to products is what we do. For us, most probably this is for you. Most probably this is a bunch of logos of Microsoft products. For me, this is the story of my life in the last 27 years. In the lower right corner, you can see Microsoft Roundtable. That was a teleconferencing device, which was my first project in Microsoft research. You can see Kinect for Windows, Kinect for Xbox 360, also a project I participated, etc., etc. So I am part of Audio and Acoustics Research Group. You see us here on the picture. We do research in the area of speech enhancement, spatial audio, audio analytics, audio devices, generative audio, and most recently biosignal processing, which explains why I'm going to talk about brain-computer interfaces. One of the pictures of the team I'm most proud of is actually this one. This is in the summer of 2019, and this is my team together with our summer interns. What is notorious for this picture is that from those people on the screen, only 2 are born in the same country, and that country is Germany. By the way, Microsoft Research has one of the best summer internship programs in the industry. And with this, let's start to talk about neuroscience and brain-computer interfaces. I will start with quoting Dr. Christoph Koch, who is the chief scientist and president of Allen Institute for Brain Science in Seattle. We don't even understand the brain of a worm. And just for comparison, a brain of a worm contains 960 neurons. Human brain contains 110 billion neurons. So we are far, far from understanding what is going on in our heads, but we try to do progress with neuroscience, which has 26 defined areas. It's a mature direction of the human science, and in those 26 areas of neuroscience, brain-computer interfaces and computational neuroscience are part of those. Neuroscience explores a very broad range of problems, even starting with the philosophical question, can a human brain understand another human brain? Pretty much a system with the same complexity. There are plenty of ethical problems. How much you can read the brain, the mind of a person without this being a super interference with the personality of that person, and how much you can influence how the brain of a person works. And in neuroscience, pretty much everything is related with the heavy technological problems. There is nothing easy in reading and decoding the state of the human brain. However, this worked because we believe that there is a big promises and big perspectives of studying the human brain, starting with cure for neurological diseases and ending with ideas for a parallel computing architectures. So, in general, the definition of brain-computer interfaces is very simple. They provide a direct communication channel between the human brain and a computing device. Okay? And this is not something isolated. Pretty much since creation of the first computer, there is a quest for more and more direct control over the computer. We started with punch cards, which you go and you punch them, and then you give to a kiosk, and they send it to the computer, and the computer does the computational work. And then next morning you go and get your uh, deck of cards, wrap it up in the listing of the execution, and then the teletypes appeared, the graphical display, and the mouse. Today we are talking about touch and gesture and speech. So pretty much BCI is the next opportunity for more direct control of the human brain. Overall, a brain-computer interface consists of acquisition of the signal, which is indication of the human brain activity, extracting some features, and running some classifier, which decodes the state of the brain. This can be commands, this can be state of the brain like fatigue, attention, etc., etc. And then those signals are used to replace certain brain, to replace certain functionality, let's say prosthetics controlled by your human brain, to restore or supplement the capabilities of the brain, learning new stuff in a better and a faster way, to enhance human capabilities, etc., etc. Applications are countless. Overall, the human brain is pretty much around between 1 and 1.2 kilogram organ which sits in our heads, and the neurons connected in that brain are specialized. We distinguish various cortex areas. And for example, here in the back of human head is where the visual cortex is. This is in green. You can see the auditory cortex above the ears connected with the neurons coming from the cochlea. And there are two large areas on top, which is the primary sensory cortex and the primary motor cortex. And the frontal part of the brain is usually when the memory, the logic. This is where, in the area where we are. But overall, you can see there are areas for sensory, for auditory, for the understanding of the speech. So in general, the areas of the brain are specialized. And the question is how we can basically detect the brain activity. And one of the most common ways for doing that is by placing electrodes directly over the brain, which is known as electrocorticography. Overall, this is a very invasive method because you open the skull and place the electrodes on top of that. Way less invasive method for getting the activity of the human brain is called electroencephalography. And you can see here electrodes placed directly on the skin on the scalp. The reason for electrical part is because neurons exchange information through moving ions, and moving ions means electrical current, which creates electromagnetic fields. So technically, by placing those electrodes, we get the electrical activity of the brain. The other is the magnetic activity of the brain. You can see on the third picture a magnetoencephalographic device which detects the magnetic field of the brain. The signal is a little bit cleaner, but it has to happen in magnetically isolated room. And besides detecting directly the activity of the brain, we can do this in an indirect way. And in the most right, you see CAP, which is the functional near infrared spectroscopy, which is literally light emitting diodes in two different infrared colors, sending a light through the skin, through the skull, to the brain, and photo sensors detecting the reflected light. In short, one of them is on the resonance frequency of the uh, oxygenation of the blood, so we can actually judge how much is the oxygenation of the blood in the vessels of the brain, and based on this we can extract information about the brain activity or the speed of consuming of oxygen. But we have to say that the brain consumes 20 to 30% of the resources in our bodies. So pretty much everything that happens in the brain impacts everything we do. Technically, the heart rate, pupil dilation, galvanic skill resistance, the dynamics of the gaze, the gesture, the posture, the gait is actually indication of how uh, we are doing in our brains. And in general, all of those methods for detecting the human brain activity can be put in this chart when on the horizontal part we see the how quickly those methods react, and on the vertical part we see the spatial resolution. So technically we spoke about EEG and magnetoencephalographic there in the upper left part, which means that they have a very good timing, resolution in time, but overall relatively low spatial resolution. fMRI imaging, PET positron tomography imaging has even lower timing resolution, but they have a little bit better spatial resolution, as you can see uh, in the chart. Also, you see here the in yellow, this is the field potential, this is the ACOG when you place the electrodes directly on the human brain, and you can see that they have a way better spatial resolution, up to 1/10 of the millimeter. If we have to summarize those technologies for getting the activities of the human brain in several parameters like signal to noise ratio, temporal resolution, spatial resolution, is it portable or not technology, is it invasive or not. So in this table we can find that in general electroencephalography is a very good trade-off of portability, signal to noise ratio, and temporal and spatial resolution. And this is why it remains the main method for obtaining the activity of the human brain. So as I mentioned, uh, neurons exchange information through exchanging ions. And when you are able to put a single electrode into a single neuron, this is called action potentials. And then you can see that actually the exchange of the information happens in spikes. So they are around 40 millivolts, and their duration is around 1 millisecond, and the frequency is between 0 and 1000 hertz. So technically, this is a pulse code modulation, which neurons use to exchange information between them. Okay, so if you open the skull, as it is shown in the upper right part, and place a grid of electrodes, those electrodes already uh, acquire the electrical activities from a group of neurons, and this is called local field potentials or ECOG. And now, because the electrode gets the average information, the spikes, the activity already is down to 50 to 350 microvolts, and the bandwidth is limited to around 350 hertz. If you place a larger plate, a larger mesh of electrodes, then again, because of the averaging, we are down to 100 microvolts, 200 hertz bandwidth. And if you place the electrodes on top of on the skin, on the skull, in general, we get 1 to 10 microvolts signal with bandwidth limited to 50 hertz. And in neuroscience, there are four bands: delta, theta, alpha, and beta. And you can see in the tables in the lower right part the frequency bands for those. What is known is that alpha is technically appears when around 10 hertz when we're sleeping, when you are closed eyes, etc., etc. It's well visible. But overall, when you get the signals from those from 16 to 256 electrodes, you see what we see on the right part of this slide. There is no way this to be interpreted manually. You will have to put it into a computer and you have to process this to get some meaningful information. Okay? So now what we look at as frontiers of brain-computer interfaces and neurostimulation. In brain-computer interfaces, the ultimate goal is to create a bidirectional communication with the brain. Literally, we think and the computer reacts on our commands, and the computer responds directly to our brain. That's what is the perfect goal, very, very far in the future. And neurostimulation, which is how a machine can talk to the brain, is in general the ultimate goal is to get individual treatment of neurological disorders. What we do have today, or very close on the horizon in the brain-computer interfaces, is bidirectional motor prosthetics. This means artificial hands, artificial leg, controlled directly by the human brain, helping people who lost their speech, and of course plenty of consumer applications. On the horizon for neurostimulation, it is mostly treating of certain neurological diseases. Biomarker, in general, in the language of neuroscience, is measuring quantitatively the level of given neurological disease. Let's say somebody has a Parkinson. Can we tell in a number between 0 and 100 how deep, how serious is that Parkinson disease? And this is super important because it allows to judge is this medicine works or not, how much the dose of that medicine should be based on after just a week of treatment. Beyond the horizon, for brain-computer interfaces, it's high-definition sensory prosthetics. Here we're talking vision, we're talking hearing. Also cognitive prosthetics, with including memory enhancement, language learning, etc., etc. And for neurostimulation, we would like to see beyond and are aiming to see a reliable, individualized treatment of neurological diseases. And of course, plenty of consumer applications. But everything like this sounds like something wow far in the future, but actually brain-computer interfaces are not science fiction. It's a market that we have already products which are on the market offered by various companies, and there are several reasons for that. What are the technological breakthroughs which allowed this explosion of brain-computer interfaces in the recent years? So the first is the progress in microelectronics. I remember in 20, 30 years ago, to place an electrode on the skin of a patient or subject, your electronic equipment had to meet super strict requirements, especially for the power supply. You don't want certain leak to create a current in you to kill your patient. So the power supply blocks were big and heavy and bulky. They were supposed to withstand 20,000 volts in peak and 6,000 volts in constant AC to be able to protect the patient. Today, system for acquiring the signals from the brain is pretty much a half a cigarette pack and uses wireless communication with the computer, so you don't have to have all of those requirements towards the power supply. It's battery operated and can basically collect and store brain signals for 8 hours, for 12 hours, for 24 hours. This is what makes the brain computer interfaces already usable outside of the lab in our everyday lives. The second area when we have plenty of technological breakthroughs that allow us to do brain computer interfaces broadly is advances in the material science. 20 years, 30 years ago, it was difficult to keep electrodes on the skin of the patient for more than several hours. Today, we have glues, we have plastics, we do 3D printed electrodes, we have special materials for coating those electrodes, and this allows a good contact with the skin for day, and the electrodes are basically placed and stay stable there. And the third technological breakthrough is the revolution in the artificial intelligence and the signal processing we can do with artificial intelligence. And you saw the electroencephalographic signal is quite complex, and it needs the artificial intelligence system, machine deep learning system, to do the processing of the signal so we can make sense of it. And if you look at the competitive landscape in brain-computer interfaces, I here basically put this in a table with two rows, non-invasive and invasive technologies, and in several columns. So passive is when you just try to detect the state of the human brain. Active, and when you have a detection of commands. Interactive and medical applications and core technology. And you can see a bunch of commands, but a bunch of companies here offering products, but from at least from the brain-computer interfaces standpoint, this group, which is basically in the square of passive, active, and interactive devices, which are non-invasive, is the subject of the best interest. So we're not going to look at all of those products, but I will mention one of the interesting products in each column. In the passive BCI devices, there are several, and I would mention here Muse, which is a device initially designed to do meditation, and it's basically a headband. You put it on your head. It has 5 electrodes, and initially it is designed to detect the signals and to help you meditation. But overall, it is basically a good signal acquisition device. In the active BCI devices, I would mention Wearables here. So this company was the first to equip virtual reality glasses with EEG electrodes, and it created and shipped the first brain-controlled computer game. In the column of interactive BCI devices, Halo Sport is a BCI device which is in the form factor of a headphones, but you can see on the top there are a bunch of electrodes which send the current pulses to the brain, presumably prepping the brain for better learning of motoric skills. So you put this device for 3 minutes, you listen to a song, and it basically stimulates your brain, and then you go to the court and for your tennis lesson, and you learn faster and better how to do backhand, for example. And in the most right column, I'll mention here first OpenBCI, a company which sells devices that allow you to build your own BCI device. And notable mention is Kernel, which releases technologies which are based not on acquiring the EEG signal, but based on functional near-infrared spectroscopy. So anyway, making a step back, brain-computer interfaces is just one of the input modalities in the overall human-computer interface. And also, this is a signal processing and classification problem. You can see that we distinguish three types of brain-computer interfaces. We saw this in our tables. One of them is the passive brain-computer interfaces, which is just monitoring the state of the human brain. That's detecting emotion, attention, cognitive load, fatigue. And this is something which can be very useful. Let's say a light and comfortable to wear device can be put on the head of a train operators, pilots of the commercial flights, and detect if they are sleepy and they are not paying enough attention while operating the machinery. In the active brain-computer interfaces, we try to decide and then to detect commands. Literally, you think about, will be nice that button to be pressed, and then the BCI decoder presses the button for you. The technologies used here are various. One of them is direct EEG decoding. Literally, you think about this and we detect it. That's very difficult. Another way to do that is to evoke potentials. Let's say the three buttons are flashing on the screen or something with different frequencies. And then when we pay attention to one of the buttons, that frequency pops up in the visual cortex. We can detect it and press that button. There are various approaches using event-related potentials, error-related potentials. We'll talk about this a little bit later. And of course, in the interactive BCIs, it's a bidirectional communication that's in very underdeveloped stage. I told you saw this is just a certain level of neural stimulation. And of course, overall, doing brain-computer interface for the sake of brain-computer interface is kind of pointless. It has to be part of the overall human-computer interface and has to have a very specific applications and to be the most convenient modality to use. Overall, I mentioned that nothing is easy in the area of brain-computer interfaces, and there are plenty of big groups of problems. The first is variability. You put the cap on with all of the electrodes, you collect data, you train your classifier, then the subject takes the cap off, puts it back on, even in the same day, and your classifier does not work that well. So this variability from session to session is a serious problem. Not to mention that we are all different. Even identical twins have a different brain signals. They are genetically the same, but the shape of the way the cortex actually is wrinkled in their heads is different. And this means that different people have different brain signals. And this variability from person to person is a serious problem to overcome. Brain signals are noisy, and this is why to get a reliable reading, we need to average. And this means for passive BCIs, we have to go 30, 60 seconds. It's perfectly fine to detect your emotion or cognitive load once per minute. But for interactive BCI, when you think and want to press a button on the screen or something to happen, already the reaction time should be 1 to 4 seconds max. And again, to return back to the scenarios, let me make a parallel with the speech recognition. For a long time, the speech recognition community thought that the most natural scenario for speech recognition is dictation. Text to speech, speech to text, right? So Microsoft, in our own experience in Windows XP, we released a speech recognizer which, with a closed talk microphone, had a 98-99% accuracy. And in Windows Vista, we released integration into Microsoft Word, which was unparalleled at the time. Pretty much that was the best dictation software. And people didn't use it. Why? Because it is more convenient to use keyboard and mouse. Yes, when you just do the text, maybe speaking is faster and more convenient, but from the moment you start to format that text, to put bold, italic, new paragraph, etc., keyboard and mouse are more convenient. Happened that for speech recognition, the best application is on devices which don't have keyboard and mouse, mobile devices, phones, and this is where it is used today. Same problem today we have with brain-computer interfaces. We have to find a scenario when brain-computer interfaces is the best choice, the most convenient choice, or the only choice. Otherwise, people are not going to use it. And I have to mention here that brain-computer interfaces is a skill. It is like typing on a keyboard or operating a mouse. You have to learn it. It's not given. So this also has to be accounted for when introducing brain-computer interfaces as modality in our devices. And of course, technologically, is a signal processing and classification problem. And there are several specific aspects of processing brain signals. First, collecting data and labeling it is super expensive. You have to invite the person, you have to put the cap on, you have to prep that subject, you collect the data, and this is why, in general, we have data sets out there with limited number of subjects, small number of labels, and very noisy signals. In audio, in text, the large language models are trained on the entire text in internet. We don't have this amount of data collected from human brains. Otherwise, once you get the signals, you do the pre-processing and preparation. This includes referencing, means simply put, you average all of the signals and subtract the average. This is because in that frequency band, the wavelength of the electromagnetic signal is very large. And technically, with this referencing, you remove the external electromagnetic interferences. Of course, you do bandpass filtering to remove all of the frequencies you don't need, hoping that this will get rid of certain signals which are also interference. And of course, artifact removal, which is basically eye blinking, movement of the subject. Muscular signals are 50 to 100 millivolts, and they compete and are registered by our system, where the brain signals are around 10 microvolts. So we use various methods, neural network, principal component analysis, to remove those artifacts and to get just the brain signal. And then, before to put this into a classifier, we have to extract certain features. Some classifiers work with the signal directly in time domain. Some classifiers do some statistics, root mean square, min, max, median, etc. Usually what we do is time frequency and time space representation. We chop the brain signals to frames, usually around a second, convert this to frequency domain, and use the spectrum as a feature in our classifiers. As far as the classifiers are concerned today, most commonly used are traditional machine learning classifiers, linear regression, SVM, but also some neural networks like fully connected neural networks, LSTM, convolutional neural networks in LSTM are used for classification. The bigger problem here is that usually with this small number of labels, they don't have enough data to shine. And this is what limits their application. So I mentioned the active brain-computer interfaces when we have to decode a command, and this has to happen fast, 1 to 2 to 3, 4 seconds. In the area of direct decoding, we distinguish several approaches. One of them is motor imaginary. So you place electrodes mostly on the top of the head when the motor cortex is, and the subject thinks about moving left hand, left foot, right foot, and this is decoded by the classifier and converted into command. You also can use visual imagery when you imagine beach or hammer or flower, and this is decoded because it creates different brain signals. You can think about speech and you can create certain mental effort. I mentioned evoked potentials. The most commonly used is steady states visual evoked potentials. We'll see a demo. Of course, we can do auditory steady state response, simply playing two different sounds, usually 300-400 hertz modulated with 10, 15, 20 hertz on the left and in the right ear. And when the person points at his attention to the left or to the right signal, we can detect this from the brain signal and convert it into the command. And you see we have even tried haptic. You wear two vibrating bracelets on the left and the right wrists, and then once you pay attention to the left or to the right wrist, we can convert this to a command by detecting it from the brain signals. Overall, I want to give you a kind of understanding what is in the academia today, which are the papers that make waves in the press. Hold on. Okay. So one of the papers I'm going to show is from University of California in San Francisco. And in this particular case, they do a real-time decoding of question and answer speech dialogue. So a neural network is trained to estimate the answer of 4 questions with total of 32 predefined answering using the brain activity. And in this particular case, it's ECOG, means the brain, the human skull is opened and you have 256 electrodes placed directly on the brain. So first you get a super high quality of the signal, and second, the perplexity is relatively low, with 4 questions with 32 answers total. But still, it's amazing the accuracy that can be achieved with this particular project. Another paper comes from decoding from University of California in Berkeley, which is decoding the semantic content of natural movies from a human brain activity. So here, they show movies to the subject, and the goal is to make a description of what is in the image. Dog, human, animal, etc., thing, person, and as input is used 32 slices of brain using 100 by 100 pixels obtained with MRI. This is a large and non-portable equipment, but interesting, they achieve accuracy of up to 92% for some categories and down to the chance for others. But again, it's interesting the approach here using fMRI, and technically the machine decodes what the person is saying. Another interesting paper comes from University of Helsinki in Finland. And in general, they show the subject a human face. And the subject is supposed to tell, actually not the subject, but by watching the face, the neural system, which is EEG 256 electrodes on an EEG cap, the person should describe, okay, the classifier based on the brain signals should describe, is this a man or woman, blonde or dark hair, smiling or serious face, etc., etc. And on the right, you see that actually the accuracy goes above 90% of this. Another interesting paper came from University di Roma in Sapienza, which is interesting with the improving the collaborative decision making for face recognition by estimating the confidence. So technically, they show a video after this fixation cross. They show a video of a person, a video around just briefly a 300 millisecond video, and then they show a portrait of a person, and the question to be answered is, have you seen this face? And the interesting aspect here is that the subject entering the answer achieves certain accuracy, and the brain decoder also achieves certain accuracy, but when you combine those, you get actually a very nice accuracy better of each one of the two modalities. So this is the collaborative between the conscious answer and decoding of the brain signal. And the last notable project is from this particular paper, which is direct decoding of EEG-based interface. So this is 8th Brain-Computer Interface Conference in Graz. They, in parallel of this conference, organize a cybathlon, which is technically a subject racing a car which they control with their brain waves. Note here that in most of the cases this happens with imaginary motion. So the person thinks about moving left, right hand to left, right foot, and then those are the 4 commands used to control the car. Note the drivers. So they are on this picture. You see that all of them are in the wheelchair. The best actually are operators are people with severe brain stem. Why? Because the motor cortex and the sensory cortex are on top of our head next to each other. And with us, when you place the electrodes on the motor cortex, the sensory cortex next is highly illuminated from signals coming from our own sensors on every single sensor in our skin, and this makes the signals from the motor cortex very noisy. People with severe brain stem, they don't have this. The sensory cortex is silent, and the signals on the motor cortex are much clearer. And of course, in this particular year, this is the paper which I'm talking about, which won the first place. They are not going to go to details. Let me talk a little bit about our own experience and what we have done in Microsoft Research. So this is our team. On the upper line are researchers in Microsoft Research. We have had several interns, you can see their names, postdoctoral researchers, and we enjoy collaboration and interaction with our consultant, Professor Adrian Casey Lee from University of Washington, Professor Barbara Shin-Cunningham from CMU, and Natalia Kosmina from MIT Media Lab. Okay, so in 2018, when you created this project, we wanted to put some frames, what we want to do. And the first, we decided that we're going to do brain-computer interfaces for general population. And this instantly means non-invasive registration of the brain activity. There is no sane person with normal health that will allow us to drill holes in the skull or open it and place electrodes directly to the brain. Also, we don't envision the person of the future going down the streets wearing a 64-channel EEG cap. So we'll have to deal with fewer number of electrodes, from 64 down to 8, 4, even 2 electrodes. And also, we expect the brain-computer interface devices to be integrated into or to look like devices we already wear on our head. So this means the form factor should be glasses, headphones, earbuds, virtual augmented reality goggles, or to look like this, and you will see some examples later. Also, in everyday scenarios, when the device is worn outside of laboratory controlled conditions, this means that it should be way more reliable and more convenient to use than the lab equipment which we use today. So from this standpoint, getting a good signal from the fewer electrodes is critical, and this is why we started to look at some specific form factors. And here you see examples of our in-ear EEG electrodes with integrated headphones. Here is a bigger picture, and you can see that the earbud has 2 metal surfaces, which are the EEG electrodes. Here is another example of pure BCI device, which has the form factor of a Bluetooth headset. So there are 2 in-ear electrodes. The electrode, then it goes above the ear. There are 2 other electrodes on the mastoids behind the ear, and the electronic is basically laying on the neck. It's on purpose, basically 3D printed using a blue plastic to resemble a similar design of a Bluetooth headset, but in general it is a stress detection device. And of course, in collaboration with Natalia Kosmina from MIT Media Lab, we participated in one of the iterations of her Attentive View glasses. So in this case, the electrodes are in the hands in the legs of the glasses, 2 of them above the ear when we don't have a hair, and there are 2 electrodes on the nose bridge. And this is actually a device which allows relatively easy to decode the concentration, the attention, and the focus of the person wearing it. And then we mastered the 3D printing of those electrodes and coating with the silver chloride. And then you can see various examples of earbuds, headphones, augmented and virtual reality glasses. In general, the goal is to be with 3D printed foam coated with silver chloride. And here is one example when we have a virtual reality glasses equipped with 32-channel EEG, and you can see the electrodes. They are long, on a long spring to compensate for the different shapes of the human head. And another example, when we have a device, Microsoft HoloLens augmented reality device, which is equipped with 8 electrodes which go on the back where the visual cortex is, and there are 3 electrodes which are not visible on those pictures, which are here on the forelobe. You will see example of this device. And let's see what we have done in the passive BCIs. The first is the stress monitoring device using biosensing headsets. I show you that headset. That's the Bluetooth headset designed with 2 in-ear electrodes and 2 electrodes behind the ears. And you can see what is interesting here is that with those electrodes behind the ear, we basically got electrocardiographic signal. And technically, each of the modalities for detecting the stress, it provides a relatively good accuracy, but when you combine them, you can boost a little bit the accuracy and to increase it. We try to do a measuring of the cognitive load using the device on the picture, which is 11 electrodes device from a company called Membrane Train. And those electrodes are soaked with a saline solution. And what is interesting here is that with our own device, we kind of managed to, it's 11 electrodes, we kind of managed to achieve pretty much the same accuracy as with the professional gel-based 128 electrodes AG cap. Another interesting project is detecting a very specific signal, which is called ERP, or error-related potentials. Every time when our brain is surprised, something unexpected happens. There is a very specific signal called ERP, which can be easily recognized. It goes outside of the pattern of the brain signals, and this can be very useful in certain specific projects. And in this particular case, it's a tool for user interface design research. Simply put, we ask the subject to perform certain tasks with the various designs of the user interface. In this particular case, the text prediction when you're typing. And the fewer number of ERP spikes we have detected means that the more intuitive is the user interface. The subject is surprised less. And of course, this combined with cognitive load, when you have a fewer number of ERPs and lower cognitive load, that's a good user interface. So in this particular case, the passive BCI is used as a research tool for designing a better user interface. In the active brain-computer interfaces, okay, you have to interpret commands. You have to react fast, okay? And of course, the first thing we did is a steady-state visual evoked potentials. This thing works. That's not the case when we do have an auditory steady-state response. The accuracy is still above the chance, which is 50%, but fewer and very, very person-dependent. What is interesting here is that while the SSVP, the steady-state visual potentials, we detect the signal in the visual cortex, simply because our attention focus called fovea of our vision is a spot with size around 6 degrees. So when I look at one of the buttons and flash, this is what gets attention and this is what pops up in the visual cortex. Audio, by its nature, it's a 360 degrees sensing. And technically, you see the modulation frequency in both ears, in both auditory cortexes. Where I pay attention, the signal, the electrodes which matter are actually here in the frontal cortex where the spatial orientation is. And it is way more difficult, and now has nothing to do with the modulation frequency of the audio, and it is way more difficult to detect. We had an experiment with those haptic somatosensory steady-state evoked potentials. So those are the two vibrating bracelets on the wrists of the subject. We got a little bit better results than with audio. Our attempts to combine them as a multimodal interface failed. We couldn't convince the brain that the vibration of the hand and the sound in your ear is the same thing. And here just several words how to address the person-to-person and session-to-session variability. And the way it is done, and the best way is so-called closed-loop adaptive brain-computer interfaces. Again, let me show you the error-related potentials. Simply put, the person puts the BCI device, sends commands to the computer, and if the computer reacts properly, everything is fine. If the computer has an error in the decoding, we can see and detect the error-related potential. And for the cases where the computer did a correct classification, you can add and start to fine-tune the neural network, the classifier. And you can see in the lower right corner, the blue line at 0.82 accuracy is when we have trained the classifier on the signals from the same session. This is what to achieve. The red line around 0.72 accuracy is when we have trained the classifier on one session, and then the subject takes off the cap and puts it back on, and it is drastic loss of accuracy. And this greenish line is when we do adaptation, and you can see that in 4 blocks of commands, each block is basically 8 commands. So in 32 interactions, we quickly achieve the accuracy of the trained on the same session classifier. Another interesting project we're going to see some demonstration is when we try to combine the gaze tracker with SSVP-based classifier. So think about this. You have to decode multiple commands, and your screen is packed with flashing buttons. This is annoying. And what we do is pretty much we have each button group to be represented by a small circle, gray circle, non-flashing marker. And once we detect with the gaze that I'm looking at that direction, then the button group activates, starts to flash, and we use SSVP-based BCI to detect which button actually flashes. And we have achieved actually quite high decoding classification. You see on the chart in the right, and gaze tracker and SSVP-based BC actually live quite well together. And this is how it looks. We installed this on a Microsoft HoloLens augmented reality device, and let's see how it look like in this particular case when we have a surgeon in the operating room wearing a HoloLens device. And this is a classic hands busy scenario when it is noisy in the operating room and you cannot use speech recognition reliable. So during the operation, the surgeon looks at given direction, given when we have a button group that is detected by the gaze tracker, and the button group is activated and starts to flash. And then by looking at one of the dots, basically the surgeon makes the selection, and this selection is, in this particular case, show me this anatomical diagram of the patient. Okay, and let's see how this works in this following video.
Hello, Michael. How are you today?
Hi, been better.
Better? This is Dr. Wong. I will be your doctor today. Do you mind if I do some check on your arms?
Sure.
Okay.
So the doctor wears the HoloLens device during the morning rounds and has to check the patient. He has busy hands.
Here we see the EEG signals from the electrodes that are placed on the back of the HoloLens on the doctor's head.
So he registers the brain activity, and then the doctor looks.
So here we see what the doctor is seeing through the HoloLens.
Okay.
If you see when he looks,
Okay, hold on. What happened?
Better. This is Dr. Wang. I will be your doctor today. Do you mind if I do some check on your arms?
Sure. Oh, come on.
Here we see the EEG signals.
Sorry about that.
From the electrodes that are placed on the back of the HoloLens on the doctor's head.
So he looks at the dot.
Here we see what the doctor is seeing through the HoloLens.
So he looks at the gray dot. You see the gaze.
In the room. When he pays attention and looks at the button, 3 flashing dots appear. Each one.
Here are the dots.
The EEG is picking up which one.
Sir, how many electrodes used here?
Say it again.
For example.
How many electrodes used?
8.
The patient's X-ray chart.
8. Okay.
On the back.
Oh, backside. Okay.
He looks at the button, and then we detect, and it shows some medical data which is visible to the doctor just through the glasses and not visible to the patient. Okay.
So, is there any specific reason only electrodes are used behind the head? Actually, like, are they observing specific disease condition or something, or?
Yes, electrodes for SSVP based at BCI has to be back in the brain, in the visual cortex. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
All right. I'll see you around.
Okay. So now I want to point to something very specific. In brain-computer interfaces, there are a group of researchers called BCI purists. They say we should use only brain signals. In our particular case, I would say that any signal we can put our hands on can and should be used. And in this particular case, we try to see, can we detect speech commands using any signal we can put our hands on. And you can see in the upper right part, our intern heavily instrumented with electrodes and wearing virtual reality glasses. And we collected data from several subjects. We trained the classifier and pretty much achieved around 0.6, 0.8 accuracy. Then we started to eliminate the number of electrodes and found that actually a single IMU unit here on the throat is sufficient to do a interesting commands decoding. And here is the video from this project.
Hey Tanmay, what are you working on? I'm working on a demo.
So you see the speech is decoded just with the IMU on the throat.
Sure. We can play a guessing game with ChatGPT. I would say some words inaudibly to try to guess a word. It could be yes, no, or something. Okay, can I guess a word? Sure. What do you want to play with? I just said strawberries, so let's go with strawberries. Try with strawberries.
So this is a game with ChatGPT when ChatGPT tries to guess the word, and in this case it's strawberry. So you see, he speaks voiceless and controls the device with that speech. In this particular case, they try to, ChatGPT asks questions, trying to guess the word.
Is it a type of food or drink? Is it a type of fruit? Is it a tropical fruit? Is it an apple? Is it a berry? Is it a strawberry?
So technically, ChatGPT was able to.
Woohoo! I guessed it correctly. You were thinking about a strawberry. Let's play again if you'd like, or ask me any other questions you have.
Okay, you got the idea. Another interesting project also is the group of direct interfaces with the computer is a project actually which uses a brain-computer interfaces device, but here we convert our enemy to our ally. I mentioned that the brain-computer devices are sensitive to muscle movements, and in this particular case, we decided, okay, why not to utilize EMG, the muscular activity, and to try to decode it. And we created a language of 8 different gestures, which you can do with your tongue. And then created an accuracy, a classifier with 90% accuracy. And it was so fast and convenient that actually we will see in the next video, Mike is playing a musical instrument. The musical instrument is behind him. This is those 5 big pipes. And the device used is Muse, which is again a BCI device. But in this particular case,
Go.
okay, you got the idea. So, in conclusion, first, utilization of brain-computer interfaces is really captures the imagination of people. In Microsoft Research, we have 3 lecture rooms and usually around 20 talks every week. And those are technical talks. They are specialized, and usually the attendance is around 10-ish people. When we do have a brain-computer interfaces talk, usually I have 30, 40, 50 people attending. It just sparks the imagination of people. And the reason we have those brain-computer interfaces are 3 enablers. The breakthroughs in microelectronics for the size of the devices and their portability, the breakthroughs in material science for electrodes and glues and the way to fix the electrode, and of course the revolution in artificial intelligence and machine learning, which basically allows us to process those complex brain signals. We see various applications in medicine and in everyday life, but still this research area is in its quest for finding the best scenario where the brain-computer interface is the most convenient input modality of the human-computer interface and or the only potential modality. And of course, we have captured a lot of technologies. We can do a lot of things with brain-computer interfaces, but we are not there yet. We are not ready for proliferation of brain-computer interface components, modalities to the overall human-computer interfaces. And you can see in the bottom of the screen a link to the project page of our brain-computer interfaces. It has all of our papers in the area. And with this, I would like to thank you for your attention. And I am open for certain questions. And actually, I will stop sharing so we can actually see each other and answer questions. Any questions, colleagues?
Hi, sir. I have a question that the work which you are doing on BCI, is it converted to some product which is commercialized or helpful for any, healthcare institute or research organization whereby some of the disease could be, curified?
So as far as Microsoft products are concerned, no, we don't have and ship any product which contains BCI component in the human-machine interface. There are companies which are shipping products. I mentioned Muse, I mentioned Halo, and those are interesting examples, good toys for data collection, hobbyists, but I have not seen anything serious in the mainstream for using by professionals, which incorporates brain-computer interfaces. Again, we're making progress. We're not there yet.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for your
You're
answer.
welcome.
Thank you.
Please go ahead and unmute your microphone and ask.
Sir, one clarification. So, how Microsoft is planning to use BCI interface for PC users in the near future?
So first, I work in Microsoft Research. This is independent from any product organization. We're on a central funding, and we can afford to do projects which are not immediate technological need for Microsoft products. In many cases, we create the technologies, we go and solicit it to Microsoft product teams. So at least I hope in the near future I'll be able to convince a product team that this is a good modality, this is an interesting experiment, and we can utilize it and deliver it to our customers. I deeply doubt that a BCI component can be useful in personal computers when you sit behind your desk and you have a keyboard and mouse in front of you. We're looking more at scenarios when you have a hands busy, when it is noisy, and speech recognition doesn't work, and you still want to do some control of your device. So think more manufacturing floor when the hands are either holding tools or wearing protective gloves, when it is noisy and the speech recognition does not work well. This is around there, or some productivity scenarios which will provide some additional channel for interfacing with the computers, but definitely not desktop and personal computer who stays when you basically have a keyboard and mouse. So this is what we and the entire BCI community is thinking about, but we'll see. That the future will show us.
Okay, sir. How about for a differently abled community?
So first, we're talking general population here, mainstream. Of course, there are plenty of medical applications. I mentioned prosthetic and controlling to your brain prosthetic hand or leg. This is already people are experimenting. When you have a disease which confines you to a wheelchair, you will be willing to use brain-computer interface if you cannot move your limbs, and that's the only way for communication. There are experiments for medical cases when you can actually look at the keyboard and type and press those buttons on the keyboard on the screen. Most probably this will be the first more serious applications of BCI before it reaches the mainstream, the general population, people which are without disabilities or any diseases. So medicine is definitely one of the first fields we're going to see brain-computer interfaces.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Oh, yes. Any other questions?
Go ahead. If not,
Sir, I think there are no more questions. They got all the things.
Can we end the lecture?
Yeah.
of
Thanks, sir.
course.
Okay, thank you, sir. It is very informative session. We learned so many things, how that brain will be connected, and how that machine learning and deep learning that you mentioned, LSTM and SVM will be helpful. So thank you very much. I'm giving 1 second.
So you're very welcome. It was pleasure to talk to you. It's always pleasure to talk with colleagues. In case of questions which come later, feel free. I'm easy to find. Send me email, and I'll try to handle and to answer as much as I can. Okay.
This is a token of appreciation. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Sir,
Can we
just a minute. Yes, Ankit.
can we take kindly turn on the camera so we can take some photograph with that speaker one?
Ankit, please remove your screen.
This one?
Yeah, so that we can take a snap.
Yeah.
Sure.
I request all the participants to turn on their camera.
Hello, madam.
Yes, please.
I am working on this BC and EEG signals on that work. So basically, I am facing the actual practical this session. Definitely, problem is arise. That time definitely I will communicate to sir. So I want to need a contact email ID or number. So please share it.
Yeah, we don't have also his sir's mobile number, but yeah, we will
Yes.
share email ID.
Email ID.
Yes, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Definitely, I will communicate to sir.
Yes. So this is the purpose of such type of the sessions.
Yes, yes. Thank you, sir. Because of more ideas clear to this session, so new techniques and new things, but actual on that best working, so multiple problems can be occur on that time. That's why later talk on.
Yes, sure.
Yes, right.
Because I have also few questions related to my two PhD students, but that also I will ask later on because we are stucking at some EEG cap part also. Because my two applications are dyslexia and another one is the EEG. On the epilepsy, in which my two students are working. But sir, for that I will discuss with you later on via mail. So all of you, please turn on the camera.
Yes, I will share the presentation.
Yeah. Hope that we have good photo, Ankit.
Yes. Okay.
And we have next speaker also on the call.
Perfect. Then I will pass the torch then to the
No,
next speaker.
you can meet her. Then after you can close.
Hello, nice to meet you all.
Pleasure.
Hello, Dr. Maria.
And then the floor is to Maria. See you
Yeah.
guys. Bye bye.
Bye bye. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Can I start the introduction?
Yes, yes.
Yes,
One
sir.
second. Yes. Okay. So, good morning. So, I'm honored to introduce the speaker of today, Dr. Maria. She is a senior scientist at the Philips Innovative Technology Hamburg, Germany, which is she joined in 2010. She received her BSc and MSc degree in physics from the University of Oldenburg in 2006 and 2007, respectively, and her PhD degree in physics in 2010. She was research associated with electrical engineering and computer science department at UC Bulgarian between 2015 and 2016. Her work is yet to many innovation related to imagining the workflow improvement, novel quantitative MRI approach, and most prominently fast MRI data acquisition. She has been granted over 35 patents from her work in MRI imaging. She was organizing committee and member of many multiple conference. Even she is currently serving on board of trustee in ISM RM, and she was guest editor of IEEE session signal processing magazines for a special issue, and so many another journal also be there in a board of member and another way. So thank you very much for accepting our invitation, and you can start your session. Hand over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I'll try to share my presentation. I'm not very familiar with Google Meet, but I hope we'll figure it out. um,
Present now option is there.
yes, present now. Okay, okay, I can present my screen. That's fine. I can do that way. And my presentation, you should be seeing my screen, and my presentation will be up in a moment.
Yes, we can see that slide or present.
Okay. And now I hope you can also see.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, well, thank you so much for the invitation also to speak here today. I'm going to talk about MRI and how we can make it a little bit faster, improve the image quality, make it more quantitative by means of applying imaging physics principles, but also techniques in signal processing and machine learning. And this is one of my favorite topics, so I'm really happy that I have the opportunity to talk to you about this today. Um, I have a 6-year-old niece, and we sometimes have a conversation about what she wants to do when she grows up. And of course, in these conversations, she asked me what I do. So the way I explain to her is that I help doctors to see inside the human body without cutting someone open. Now, needless to say, now she thinks I have superpowers. And she's right. Medical imaging is a superpower. Um, and MRI is a particularly fascinating imaging modality. It is non-invasive. It does not use any ionizing radiation. Instead, it is based on nuclear spins. It has an excellent soft tissue contrast, in fact, better than any other medical imaging modality, and it can be used to visualize both morphology and physiology. MRI is also used a lot. It is difficult to say how many are the MRI exams that are done worldwide, but these are some estimations. There are about 40 million exams done in the USA, about 12 million in Germany, about a million in Belgium, and here what you see here on the plot is the number of MRI exams done between the years of 2010 and 2019 in France. So um, it has more than doubled in this period of 10 years. So we can see that roughly it's about 200 million maybe a year exams worldwide. give or take. Again, exact numbers are difficult here, and this number is steadily increasing. So there is an increasing need of MRI. However, there are also many challenges. We have long waiting times. I'm not sure how it is in India. In Germany, I would estimate that the waiting times are not so long, but usually you have to wait for a few weeks if you want to have an MRI. Sometimes it is even longer. So I saw a study from 2019 from Croatia where the time was 220 days, I believe. So it varies depending on which country you are, probably based on the medical insurance you have, but it is on the longer side. MRI is also perceived as expensive relatively to other modalities because the scanner is expensive, but also the images are difficult for interpretation and need to have well trained radiologists for interpretation. We have long examination times, I would say traditionally, but what I'm going to talk about today is really how we can reduce these long examination times. So they've been traditionally about half an hour to an hour, and we're seeing changes today with the development of technologies. We have very complex modalities, and a lot of what we'll be talking about are so-called artifacts or structures or effects in images that are not real and that are artificial. So that's why they're called artifacts. The scans, I'm not sure if any one of you have been inside an MRI machine, but it is rather loud, which is sometimes unpleasant for the patients. And it's not available for all patients. Certain types of metal implants can be problematic, but there are more and more MR compatible implants. They could heat up. That's the problem. Or having interacting with the magnetic field. It is usually a narrow tube, so some patients can be claustrophobic. And then we have all other issues like reproducibility because of the complexity, quantification, and as we saw from the previous slide, there is increasing need that is difficult to meet. So in summary, we need MRI to be faster, better, and cheaper. And we'll have a look how we can achieve at least part of these with the help of advanced image reconstruction. Okay, but before I go to that, I want to give you a little bit of background that will be helpful to understand what I'm talking about. So this will be a very brief introduction to MRI. So in the center of an MRI machine is a big magnet that produces a strong magnetic field that we call B naught. So this will come up a lot in my talk. Typical field strength for MRI, for clinical MRI scanners are 1.5 or 3 Tesla. But there are also higher magnetic fields out there. So there is 7 Tesla scanners. There are also higher field strength that are built that are referred to as ultra high field. That can be interesting for some applications. And there's also on the other end, renewed interest into lower field systems. So we have scanners with down to about 50 millitesla. So different kind of applications there as well. When we apply the strong magnetic field to a patient, or when we put the patient in the scanner, what happens is that the patient is made up of atoms, and the atoms have nuclear spins that have magnetic properties. And the whole thing is a quantum mechanical effect, but on a macroscopic scale, it can be described in a very similar way as having a magnet interacting with a strong magnetic field. So if you put a compass needle in a magnetic field, it will align with the magnetic field. And much in the same way, if you put a patient in a scanner, this will create a magnetization in the patient because of the magnetic properties in the nuclear spins. Now, if we apply a second magnetic field, this time not a constant magnetic field, but time varying magnetic field or electromagnetic wave, which we'll call B1, this can excite the magnetization or tip away the magnetization from the direction of magnetic field. And this can has to be at a specific frequency, which is called the alarm frequency or the resonance frequency. And in MRI, typically clinical MRI is based on hydrogen nuclei because of their high abundance in the human body. So this is in water and both in fat. And this resonance frequency is in the radio frequency range. So that's why we call the second magnetic field or the electromagnetic wave that we apply radio frequency pulse or RF pulse. Okay, so we have the star magnetic field, we have the excitation, and now what happens is that we have this magnetization that's processing with the alarm frequency around the strong magnetic field, around this direction. So if we put a detector or a coil next to the patient, this will induce a current in the coil. So that's how we'll detect a signal. At that point, we measure signal from everywhere, so we cannot localize it. And to do that, yet another magnetic field. So we apply magnetic field gradients in order to have spatial localization. And we'll have a little bit more look into that a little bit later. So once we have measured the signal, then we have to obtain an image from the measured signal in the coils, and this is referred to as image reconstruction. Okay, so this was a very quick introduction to MRI, but I hope it gave some of the terms. All right, so we'll be looking into MRI as an inverse problem. So in the center of this is the signal model. So we have the patient, we put the patient in the scanner, right? We apply our magnetic fields, we can measure a signal. And now in order to obtain this image from the measured signal, we have to tell the reconstruction how the data has been measured in order to obtain the image from the signal, from the measured signal, right? So this is the role of the signal model. This model can also be called a forward model, essentially describes how the data would look like, assuming that we already have the image, right? So here Y is our measured data, rho is the image that we want to obtain, and F is our forward model. This can be linear or nonlinear. We have also some assumptions about the noise. And we are solving an inverse problem, right? Because we want to recover rho, the cause based on the observations or the data. Now, if we're solving an inverse problem, we usually want to have a well-posed inverse problem. And what this means is that a solution exists, the solution is unique, and also the inverse mapping from the data to our image is well conditioned, which means that a small perturbation in a measurement will lead to the small perturbation in the image. Now, in practice in MRI, we are always dealing with ill-posed inverse problems. We don't have an exact solution. We, in fact, never have an exact solution because we have noise in the data. And also there might be some data inconsistencies. The solution is not unique because we have incomplete data. And even if we perform what we call in MRI a fully sampled case space, I'll come to the case space a little bit later, we stop acquiring the data at certain spatial frequencies. And really, we don't know what's beyond. And there are infinitely many images that can correspond to the measured data. So we have to make some decisions for which image are we going to decide. And then sometimes the problem can be also ill-conditioned, which is, for example, in the case of parallel imaging, which we'll have a look at, sometimes we have a little bit noise in the data, which can lead to local noise amplification if we try to push the acceleration or if we reduce the data that we have measured. Okay, so I mentioned that we apply magnetic field gradients for spatial encoding. So this is the basic encoding, spatial encoding principle in MRI. So our resonance frequency is proportional to the external magnetic field. And if we have a constant magnetic field, everything will have the same resonance frequency. If we apply spatial variation, so this will be the magnetic field gradients, then we introduce an additional magnetic field, and as a result, we'll have a spatial dependence of the alarm frequency or the resonance frequency. And this is how we introduce spatial encoding in MRI, which is also called gradient encoding. Okay. The most basic signal model that's very broadly used is so-called Fourier encoding model. And the way we acquire data is in such Cartesian line by line manner. This means that we apply our series of radio frequency pulses, gradients for the spatial encoding, and then we read the signal. And effectively, what we'll be measuring is so-called line in k-space, which corresponds, essentially our measurements will correspond to the spatial frequencies. And this is our model. And then we repeat the whole thing until with slightly different settings to cover the next lines until we are ready. So once we have acquired the data in this way, our measurement will be covering this k-space, and our signal model tells that this measurement is a Fourier transform of the image. So we simply need to perform an inverse Fourier transform and we have our image. Now, this is great. And this model is really very nice in many ways. The FFT is very fast and simple. We have uniform resolution and point spread function across the image, which is not something self-evident at all. It's not the case in many other imaging modalities. We have unitary encoding and reconstruction. So the world is really nice. And this model is in fact so attractive for its simplicity that somehow we have tried to adapt everything else in MRI to fit that model. But the problem with this is that in many cases, this model is way too simplified and it simply doesn't describe our measurements accurately enough. So what is it actually that we're measuring in MRI if it's not the Fourier transform of our data? Well, it's quite a lot. So there are many different effects that are mixing in together. So we have different effects, so different properties or magnetic properties of the tissue that we're measuring, so-called relaxation times that we have T1, T2, proton density. We have different type of motion and different scale, including diffusion effects, perfusion, physiological motion, so breathing, cardiac motion. What we measure doesn't only depend on the patient, on the tissue properties, but also on the scanner. So what we're measuring also depends on our magnetic fields, right? The static magnetic field, the RF field, as well as the timing of the sequence. So how long do we apply these gradients? In which times do we apply it? So these are these timing coefficients, and there are also a number of other effects like chemical shift, magnetization transfer, magnetic susceptibility, that are taking place and we'll see in the images. So what we measure in MRI is really a complex function of tissue parameters, system parameters, and sequence parameters. And what we usually try to do is we want to perfect our system, right? So get these fields as uniform as possible, as homogeneous as possible. And then we tune the sequence parameters in a way that we mostly see one of these tissue effects when we perform a measurement. But of course, we cannot isolate one of them. So it's always a mixture of all the effects when we do that. And this is why we have such a high complexity. Also, in addition, we acquire data with what we call a coil array, and I'll go a little bit more in detail on that, but this adds complexity to the reconstruction. We can cover the k-space or the spatial frequency domains in many different ways. So it doesn't have to be in line by line way, as I described before. So there are just some examples of different trajectories. They all have their advantages or disadvantages. But as we move away from this line by line Cartesian acquisition, we get more sensitive to the effects such as gradient delays and imperfections. So are our magnetic field gradients that we apply really the same as we want them to be, right? As we tell the scanner to play. And if they deviate, we'll have some distortions. All right. So how can we deal with that? And a lot of this is in looking into the signal model and extending it in an appropriate way. So as I mentioned, we acquire the data with so-called radio frequency coils, right? So we have a signal that's in the radio frequency range and we have a detector. So A typical so-called birdcage coil is what you see on the left. So this is the first one. So this happens to be a head coil. But it's in the same design, we have a body coil that's integrated in the board that you usually don't see. So the advantage of such a coil is that it provides very uniform spatial sensitivity throughout the volume, but it usually has relatively low signal to noise ratio. And this is because it's far away from the patient, especially the body coil. Now, there are also surface coils like this one in the middle, and you can place the surface coil really close to the body, and it will have very high sensitivity close to the body, but the sensitivity will drop as the distance increases, right? And we this type of surface coils have been introduced in the 90s and early 2000s as a way to improve the signal to noise ratio of our measurements. But in the meantime, they are also used in other ways, as we'll see in a moment. And they are different. They're not used as individual coils, but in a coil array. Now, this is a little bit extreme example, what you see on the right. So the patient covered from top to bottom with these coil arrays. So usually what we have is specialized coil arrays. You can see here that these are several different, so 3 different coils in the body, and one is a head coil. So we have specialized coils for different organs that are used, but each of them will be containing a different number of coil arrays, something anywhere between, I would say, 10 and 100, depending on the application. Okay, all right. So if we acquire the data with such coil array, we'll have some small complication, right? So how do we account this into the signal model? So we can say, well, we have our Fourier encoding, we have also the call sensitivity, right? So this is right in here. And one option would be to say, well, we want to keep our Fourier encoding because we like it. We just perform the Fourier transform. And then what we'll be reconstructing is for each coil, the shaded images. So it will be the image that we have. This will be the patient multiplied by the coil sensitivity. And as we see here, these are such individual coil images on the right. I'm not sure. I hope you can see also my mouse. So you have high intensity close to the coil, and it drops as it goes away. So we can do that. And then we have to figure out a way how to combine all of these data. And this can be done, for example, just applying sum of squares of the individual complex images. Now, another way to interpret it, though, is say, well, really what we want to reconstruct is this here, right, row. And the call sensitivities can be interpreted as part of the encoding. So now we have a hybrid encoding that consists of the Fourier encoding that we had before, the gradient encoding, combined with the sensitivity encoding. And this is interesting because this not only allows us to directly reconstruct this image without first reconstructing the shading images or correct for the shading, but it also allows and gives additional encoding and allows us to acquire less data and still be able to get a good image. So this is great. Because we can save scan time. However, this also leads to more complex reconstruction, and we need some knowledge about the call sensitivities. This typically means that we either have to measure them or estimate them from the data in some way. Okay. Another effect is off resonance effect. This means that we usually want to have very uniform static magnetic field B naught, and off resonance means anything that's deviating from our static magnetic field. And even if we design a magnet in a way that the magnetic field is perfectly homogeneous, at the moment that we put a patient in the scanner, the magnetic susceptibility of the patient will interact with the external magnetic field, so we'll have slight variation. So it will be slightly inhomogeneous. So this inhomogeneity, since our Larmor frequency or our resonance frequency is proportional to the external magnetic field, will disrupt our encoding, right? And as an effect, if we just discard that, we'll see that we have artifacts, and they will depend on how we cover our k-space, how we go through the spatial frequencies. In EPI trajectories, which is going in a zigzag trajectory from top to bottom, we see such geometric distortions as here on the top. In spiral acquisition, where we start from the center of k-space and go spiral out, we have the disturbance in all directions, so we see blurring. And this, depending on how, like, there are different ways to acquire the data, this will look slightly different. Now, if we include this additional off resonance in the signal model, we can account for that and then correct for such effects. And again, here we need to know these measurements. So we need to either estimate it or measure it in some way. Now, another source of off resonance is chemical shift. And this simply means that the hydrogen nuclei in fat have a slightly different resonance frequency compared to water, right? And this slight difference in the resonance frequency means that if we acquire at the resonance frequency of water, the fat will be encoded at a different place. So if we acquire, again, line by line in a Cartesian trajectory, we'll have an effect like this. So our real spatial relationship will be here. We have like just a subject, like the circle will be water that's surrounded by fat, and the shift caused by off resonance will cause the fat to be slightly shifted. So on the one side, we'll see this darker area. On the other one, where the fat and water overlap, this will be a brighter area. This is an example how we see that in vivo. So in the kidneys, usually the kidneys are surrounded by fat. So we see exactly this effect here, the darker rim on the one side and the brighter on the other. And this is caused by this chemical shift. Now, we can correct for this again if we extend our signal model. And this is done by representing our image that we want to reconstruct as a superposition of a water image. This is the raw water, a fat image. And the fat is a little bit more complicated. So it has more than one spectral peaks or a resonance frequency. So this is the spectral model that's included here. And again, here we also have our global B0 variation that's included. In this example, we have spiral acquisition. So again, we have the blur of the fat. So around the skull, there is some fat, and I'm not sure if you're able to recognize it. This is blurred where the brain is actually sharp. Also around the eyes, we have a blur. This is the measured or the estimated, actually, it's estimated from the data, the field map in hertz that shows the spatial distribution of the off resonance. And if you use such extended signal model, one of the other advantages is that you can reconstruct two separate images, one of water, so this is the water image, and one of fat. And this can be, having a separate fat image can be interesting for some clinical applications. Okay. On top of the static B0 variations, we can also have dynamic B0 variations, what you can see here in the brain. And for example, if you're lying in a scanner and you're breathing or you're moving your limbs, this will cause variations, temporal variations in your brain, which is a little crazy, but that's what you were seeing in this example. And this is just the temporal variation. Now, this is very small. This is in the order of a few hertz fluctuations. And we're measuring, right? Remember, in radio frequency, so this is in the range of megahertz. So the effect is not that large, and sometimes it remains unnoticed. But in specific sequences that have long echo time, this can lead to artifacts if not accounted for. So this is what you see here, shading in the images. And again, if we include that in the signal model, so these temporal variations, we can correct for it. In this case, this was measured by an external device that measures the field variations over time. And on the right, it's another work that has estimated these field variations from the data itself as a self-consistency constraint. This is a work from one of my colleagues in Hamburg. Okay, now There are a number of different effects that also describe the system behavior that are related to the gradient system response, eddy currents, concomitant fields. So there is also some physics that's related to that. And if we go on non-Cartesian trajectories, like here again, like it is spiral, we have the blur, because if we don't really know how our system is responding over time. So there are different ways to correct that. You can apply that's called the gradient impulse response function. So essentially perform a system calibration, and that maps the gradients that you want to apply to the ones that are actually played on the scanner. Or you can again perform field measurements, which is with an external device, just measure how the field changes really over time. This is an example how such higher order effects also can be corrected for. So from the first image to the second is just the shift, so the first order effects, but we have some additional blurring that can be reduced in this case with higher order effects. Okay, T1 and T2. So these are tissue properties, and they are related to the behavior of tissue in the magnetic field. So as soon as we have our system or our spin system excited, as soon as we stop doing that, it will start returning to equilibrium, right? And this happens according to two processes. We have T1 relaxation, which is the recovery of the magnetization, of the longitudinal magnetization, which is an exponential recovery curve. And we have the decay of the transverse magnetization, which we actually measure. And this is a different effect that happens faster than the T1 recovery, which is due to dephasing. So we have two exponential decays. And these T1 and T2 processes, recovery processes, are different for different tissues. Which is what we use in MRI as a source of contrast. That's why we can see different tissues appear brighter or darker depending how we measure them. But also depending on how we acquire the data. So T1 is for some tissues can be in the order of seconds. This these effects can also affect our measurements if we have the changes during acquiring we acquire the data. And so what do I mean by that? If we have a so-called spin echo sequence, right? So we apply our excitation, our RF pulse, we do something called refocusing. I'm going to skip that for a moment. And then if we wait long enough, we can just repeat and acquire another line in K-space. This is all good. In this case, relaxation will only be the source of contrast in MRI. However, this takes a very long time because, as I said, we have to wait for maybe, let's say, 10 seconds before we can repeat our sequence if we want the signal to completely relax. Now, instead, what we can do is apply additional refocusing pulse and reuse the magnetization to acquire more lines in K-space. So that's used a lot in MR. But what you see is that as we do that, our signal will decay, and with the T2 decay. So as we acquire different lines in the spatial frequencies, they'll be modulated by the decay. So this applies essentially a spectral, a filter in the spectral domain. And this will be different depending of this T2 property of the tissue. Okay, if we acquire the data starting from the center of K-space, this will be the lowest spatial frequencies to the higher spatial frequencies. This will result in blurring. So this is a typical effect in 3D fast spin echo acquisition. So we can again include that into the signal model in order to reduce this blurring, but this is not so easy because we need to know the spatial distribution of T2 from the tissues and where do we get it from, right? So there is a work by John Tamira and colleagues where they have instead of going from the center out every time, they have randomized the way we acquire the data over the different echo times and use compressed sensing in combination with this extended signal model. So each of the images will be we'll have less data than we have, but using the knowledge of this extended signal model and some additional prior knowledge, then they can correct for the blurring, and also they obtain images at different T2 weighting, right? So this is sampling this whole decay curve, if you like, which could be interesting clinically. Okay, now going a step further, we can also include other effects such as T1, diffusion into our signal model. So it gets a little bit more complex. And for this, we can use the Bloch equations to describe how the signal will look like. And we can simultaneously estimate quantitative parameter maps from the data. So really estimating not an image, not a contrast weighted image, but recovering the tissue properties that generated the contrast, which is advantageous in terms of reproducibility. Okay. MRI is also very sensitive to motion, and there are different types of motion that we can capture or be sensitive to, depending on how you're looking into. So diffusion is essentially we have the Brownian motion of water, and it's an interesting to measure in MRI because for example, in cancer, we have diffusion restriction in some cases because of cell swelling, and we want to be able to detect that. So we have sequences in MRI that are very sensitive to such changes of the diffusion. And usually the way we acquire them is that we have a pulse sequence and we cover the whole K space in one shot. Now, this works well, but it limits the resolution for which we can acquire the data. So if instead we segment it, so we acquire just a little bit of the K space and then we repeat it again, acquire more, and then until we fill the K space, we can increase the spatial resolution. But the problem is that each of these shots, so-called shots, will have different spatially varying phase that's caused by microscopic motion. And if we simply combine these data, because of this different spatially variable phase, we'll get phase cancellation and getting such artifacts, which is really not nice. So again, here we can extend our signal model, include the phase, and we can estimate the phase either from the data itself or using so-called navigators. So we have a small additional measurement just for estimating the phase after each shot, and we can get the nice image here. All right, moving from microscopic motion to macroscopic motion, if we have a scan that takes several minutes, you can imagine that, for example, breathing will be a problem, or a heartbeat will be a problem, but also sometimes patients just move, right? So even if in brain scans we have motion artifacts. So in this case, again, we have a bulk motion here, so it's not just the phase, and we can include that into the signal model, which was the formulation of so-called Griggs method by Freddie Odile. So this is the reference here from 2008. So there are many methods that are looking into that because it's such a big problem. I'm just highlighting two. So the one on the left is using so-called radial acquisition, where we can estimate the motion from the data. We can bin it into different motion bins and then correct for it as part of the reconstruction. So this is a work by Ricardo Otaso and colleagues. And on the right, we have a Cartesian acquisition, where we have scrambled a little bit how we acquire the data, again for the same reason, to be able to have good coverage of the K space for different motion states. So this is the disorder method. So this is from exactly the same data, can be corrected by estimating and including the motion into the signal model. So this is what we get from the left to the right. All right, now this was a lot of different things. If we put all of them together, we'll have some equation like this, and I have not even put everything together. So this is really scary. Now, if you think about it, we still are doing the same thing. We have our measurements Y. we have our forward model and we have our image that we want to estimate. So we can just use, we can just minimize the distance between the forward projection and the data. However, we know that if we have such a complex model, the reconstruction problem might be nonlinear, non-convex, ill-conditioned, or even ill-posed. So it could be a really hard problem to solve, and we might need a lot of additional measurements in order to be able to solve this problem. So how did we get into this mess in the first place? Well, some of this is just physics, right? So there is the motion effects, for example, they just happen, and this is how we perform measurements. Also, the relaxation effects, they are there. But a lot of this was created by trying to scan faster. So scans used to take a really long time in the past, and trying to get them faster and faster, we are just ignoring some effects, like we don't want to wait longer, and we do have changes, for example, due to relaxation. But even that is not fast enough, right? So going fast for case space, like just on one shot, is in some cases not fast enough. So we want to get even faster. So we skip some of the data, but we still want to have great images. So how can we possibly do that? And if it seems hopeless, it's not. It's not, because we do have some additional knowledge in many cases, and it can be used to inform the reconstruction, and get more out of the data. Now, for the next few minutes, I'm going to talk a little bit from a different angle. How do we apply such additional knowledge in the reconstruction? And starting again from our reconstruction problem, right? Instead of solving our original problem, now we're solving a so-called regularized inverse problem. So, and this regularization is used to introduce additional knowledge that we have to the reconstruction to help the reconstruction find the right solution. For example, in compressed sensing, this prior knowledge is sparsity. So we know that our image will be sparse. So we have many zeros, few non-zeros, in a transform domain. For example, in this case, this is the wavelet domain. And we do that by including the L1 norm of the wavelet transform of the image as a regularizer. This is an example how this can help. So we can acquire less data. So sense is just parallel imaging. So using the multiple coils for acceleration, this is just one approach to do that. And if we can do that for 2 minutes, we can reduce the acquired data and the scan time, in this case, to 1 minute 30. And by using this additional prior knowledge, we can get pretty much the same image quality in less time. This is just another example. In this case, reducing the scan time from almost 4 minutes to just over 2 minutes. Okay. Another approach is, if we have some examples of the data, is to have more targeted prior. And this can be done, for example, using dictionaries. So we have image patches, and we learn that a dictionary that helps us to represent each patch as a linear combination of such features that are extracted from the image patches. This can be done also for temporal variation, so dynamic data, or if we want to have the whole decay, as we saw in the T2 mapping, right? So, and if we have some prior as the signal model, right, this can also be included in such temporal dictionary. Now, this is already a step towards learning-based or data-driven regularization, but it is relatively simple. Now, in the last few years, there have been more and more use of neural networks and deep learning for MRI reconstruction. And if you look into the problem that we're solving, and this is one example using variational neural networks, this can be really represented in a very similar way to what we've been doing before, right? So again, we have our data consistency here, but instead of having, for example, wavelet regularization, now we have a set of spatial convolution kernels, nonlinear functions, and regularization parameters, and they are all estimated by the data. And here again, by using such more adapted prior, we can push a little bit toward better image quality, towards higher acceleration, or reconstructing from less data. Now, this is like a really active research field, and there is a lot that has been going on here. It's hard to mention everything, but so we have convolutional neural networks, we have vision transformers going on, right? So, and only the future will show what will come next and what will establish. But I think something that we've learned so far is that physics-driven deep learning reconstruction, where we both account for data consistency together with the deep learning prior, tend to be much more robust than just using deep learning as post-processing. So trying to get rid of the artifacts without using the signal model. So using these two parts together, a good signal model together with learning based approach seems to be performing much more robust. Okay. Now, I talked a lot about the signal model, but maybe something to mention here is that it's what we use is usually a simplified signal model, and deep learning can be helpful in some situations to improve on the signal model, right? So we can take, for example, so-called synthetic contrast generation. So we can acquire what we call multi-contrast data. So we have multiple images. I'm not going to go into detail how we can acquire these, but it takes a little bit longer time. We can encode multiple contrasts, if you like, at the same time. We can use extended signal model again with the Bloch equations to estimate the physical maps. So this will be the tissue parameters. So in this case, this is T1, T2, and proton density. And once we have estimated these tissue parameters, we can use MR physics again to estimate different contrast-weighted images. So this will be the typical images that the radiologist will be looking into, right? So, and the good thing about it is that we can, if we have this full description of how the tissue parameters are, we can vary these in very different ways and get all possible contrast. So it is more efficient, right? And there is also a commercial product that does that called synthetic MR. But the problem is that even if it works really well, I have to say it works really well, but the image quality is not quite there as the native images. And the problem with that is that we have two steps. And in both steps, we do have some approximations, right? So there are certain effects that are not so easy to model, and we do have approximations for that. Now, at the same time, we know that neural networks are really good at approximating even very complex models. So why don't we just train directly a neural network to estimate from this multi-contrast scan our contrast weighted images. So that's what we try to do with a couple of colleagues. So we have a paper that was published almost 2 years ago, 2023, I think it was towards the end of the year, where we first tested it on volunteers, and since then we've also extended it on pediatric patients, which is a little bit different population because the contrasts are a little bit different at kids. And these are a little bit, I'm not going to go into too much details what we did, but it is, if you notice, it is very little training data, if you like. So it's only 40 patients that were used for training. However, you have to think about, we are looking into the temporal evolution, right? So every single voxel is used for training. So it is a lot of data that we have. And these are some examples that we have for such. So on the top, you see this AI-based direct contrast synthesis, what we call, so directly estimating the contrast weighted images using a neural network. So these are 3 different contrasts. The middle one is I'm sorry. Okay, that was a little pause. So in the middle one is what the synthetic MR does. So these are the 2 steps approach. So getting the 2 physics-based models after each other. So again, the images are not bad, but we do see, some some issues here. And then on the bottom are the actual native contours that were measured. So we did have an evaluation with radiologists, and indeed they could confirm that the AI-based images were better than the synthetic images and these, and then had comparable image quality to the state-of-the-art images, which is very few evaluations, but still very promising results. Okay. All right. Now, maybe a last point that I'm going to bring here is that a prior is also just a model. So we had a model that we want to learn, but really the priors that we have is this additional prior knowledge, and we have to be careful how we use it. So going back to compressed sensing in this relatively simple model, we have our data consistency here, we have our regularization, and we have our regularization parameter lambda. So if we think about the error that we get in the final image, it is composed of two parts. So the one is the propagated data error. So if you have ill-posed problem, a little bit of noise in the input will lead to noise amplification, right? So if we don't have any regularization, we have a lot of noise amplification, a lot of error. As we increase the regularization, we'll get more stable reconstruction. So we get less of this noise amplification or propagated data error. Now, the other term that comes here as we increase our regularization will be approximation error, or the bias that we introduce through the regularization. And if we put too much weight here, at some point, our image might have nothing to do with our data, right? So it is all of it will be the prior, and this can be dangerous. So there is a sweet spot somewhere in between where we have the optimal regularization parameter that gives us stable reconstruction, but also doesn't introduce too much bias. And these are some extreme examples here that it was some of the older works on compressed sensing where a lot of and the sampling was done. So it was a very ill post-inverse problem in combination with very high regularization. So we can start seeing artifacts here, right? So this is total variation. You see these staircase artifacts. In wavelets, you see this kind of like typical, I don't know, star-like wavelet artifacts really that are there. Now, this is relatively easy to understand, right? You know, we have total variation. It's kind of, we have like patch white smoothing, if you like. We have the wavelets. We know what happens if we weight too much towards that. But how about deep learning, right? If we have so complex reconstruction, it is not always so intuitive. So these are some examples of hallucinations that were taken from the 2020 FastMRI Challenge that was organized by NYU and Facebook. So what you see here on the top are the ground truth images, and we're going to see some very strange artifacts. So here on the bottom, you see this line here appearing in one of the reconstruction that looks like a vessel. We have this kind of a chain structure here, and also here creating a line that actually looks very plausible. Like if you look at this, you wouldn't know that it's not real if you don't have the knowledge about anatomy, or if you haven't seen the ground truth image. So it could be really tricky using AI-based reconstruction to what kind of error your model introduces, because we don't have like one regularization parameter and a very well-defined prior, but we have complex prior and many parameters. However, this simply means that we need lots of testing, good understanding. I would say physics-based model are a key here, and also using good machine learning practices to minimize the risk of such errors. Okay, so maybe you're asking yourself, okay, how much of this what I'm talking about is research, how much it is used in clinical practice? So for the last few minutes, I'm going to talk a little bit about what's actually out there. So a lot of this what I mentioned was indeed research, but there is a lot actually that's used, and there is a lot of experience. So here is a comparison between three different images. So the left one is just parallel imaging. So it is accelerated using the sensitivity encoding, right? The multiple coils. The middle one uses in addition compressed sensing, so we can reduce the scan time from almost 2 minutes to 1 minute and 14 seconds, and we can further push to just under a minute. And as you can see, the image quality of these 3 images is very comparable. I would rather say that maybe the third one has a little bit better sharpness. We can use that also in a different way, right? So what you see here on the left is again like very high, too high acceleration really for parallel imaging, where we see this noise amplification, especially towards the middle of the brain. If we don't want to push anymore here, we use exactly the same acceleration, so the scan time is the same, but we can by applying a wavelet regularization here as a prior, we can really improve the image quality, and we can get a little bit better even with AI-based reconstruction. The same thing can also be used in dynamic imaging. So we have here cardiac cine imaging, again with parallel imaging, where it has been pushed to the limit. We have a lot of noise amplification, where it can get tricky to read. We have quite some improvement in compressed sensing and in even better image quality in AI-based reconstruction. Another way to use that is not to make the scans faster but to improve the resolution. So in this case, we have the same scan time, but on the left, the data were acquired with 0.5 millimeters acquisition, and on the right, it's been reduced to 0.3. So usually it would mean longer scan time, but due to more in the sampling, we have the same scan time. And maybe you can already appreciate that we have much more detail into the image on the right. Here is a zoom in, so we can see really where we start seeing more of the bone structure. This can also be applied for quantitative imaging, so extracting the quantitative parameter maps or quantitative tissue parameters from the data. And again, like one on the left is parallel imaging, one on the right is AI-based reconstruction. And what's important here is, because we want to use this data quantitatively, is that we do have reduced noise, so I think it's visible, but the data themselves, so the quantitative values do not change. Okay, and so what I mentioned just in last few examples was accelerating individual scans, but it's really important to think about of ultra fast exams. So reducing the time of the overall exam, and usually what we're talking about is the dream of having a 5-minute MRI exams or less. So here are a few examples where combining these techniques actually have made that possible. This is just under 5 minutes, complete brain exam, where we have a 3D T1 scan, a T2 coronal scan, we have 3D flare, diffusion, the quantitative diffusion, as well as susceptibility weighted imaging. So this is not all we can measure in MR, but this is usually enough for many clinical indications. And this is really a great image quality, what we can achieve here. This is an example of a 3-minute C-spine, again, with all the AI acceleration that you can get. We can get to again like 1 minute for obtaining these 2 images, another 40 seconds for the T1 weighted scan, and then actual scan is again about 1.5 minutes. A 2-minute knee protocol. So again, we have here proton density with and without fat suppression that can be put together in under 2 minutes. So if I have to summarize everything in just a few words, the Fourier model, the K-space, it's a great model, but it is restricted, and if we just want to stick to it, this causes artifacts and makes life difficult in many ways, right? So just trying to avoid the errors. So we can use extended signal modeling. We can use other advanced reconstruction techniques to reuse these artifacts, to improve the scan efficiency. So we've seen that getting faster scan, improved image quality with parallel imaging, with compressed sensing, with AI-based reconstruction, enable efficient quantitative MR. I think we're not there yet, but we see more and more trend towards getting quantitative data from the MR scanners, which is more reproducible. And I think it is the future towards also more automation in the diagnosis. Getting this fully comprehensive model, you saw that it is complicated, it is still challenging, but we see many changes. I mean, there has been a tremendous increase in computation power. We see huge advancements in AI-based approaches, data adaptive approaches. Um, Also, there are interesting works also on the physics side, right? Working on more complex signal modeling that can be implemented nowadays with this increased computational power. So, and we're really getting close to these 5-minute exams. So I'll show you examples. It's not still the time where such examples can be run in every single hospital, but we are getting close to that. So with this, I would like to thank the people that contributed material for my slides, all the groups around the world really who have worked on this, because it's a huge amount of work of many groups. If you want to know more, I can recommend you a book that I had the pleasure to co-edit a couple years ago, which is called Magnetic Resonance Image Reconstruction. It is also with some practical tasks that you can do some programming. My talk is pretty much along the lines of an article that I had a couple of years ago, which is called Mathematical Models for Magnetic Resonance Image Reconstruction. And another article that I want to mention was this one, The Foundations of Computational Imaging, a Signal Processing Perspective, which is a little bit broader than just MRI. So I'm going to stop here and I'm open for questions. And maybe there are questions already.
Thank you very much. Some of the faculty having writing down in a chat box that
Okay,
question.
let me see if I can open the chat box. This is, okay, maybe I need to stop sharing.
Even the faculty can ask
Oh,
directly.
okay. I think I found the chat box. Okay. Oh, there is quite some. Oh, okay. So maybe I have to scroll to the right position. Or maybe you can already ask me. I'm not sure if I'm finding the right.
Okay. S. Kumar, if you want to ask that question directly or directly, I can read it from the chat box.
Ankit, you can narrate that question.
Okay. Where is the question? Non-intuitive brain computer interface BCI. Helmet, what is your opinion on that? Some of the faculty asking.
On brain computer interface, I didn't get.
I think this is the question for the last session.
Oh, okay.
So
Sorry.
here it is not related. So the question is from the, I think that from the Sahil Kumar, is that there are numerous libraries and tools available for whole human body MRI temporal modeling. Which one your are used? Why? That was the question. Which one is you are using and why?
For temporal modeling.
Yeah, that is what the question.
Okay, so it depends a little bit what the temporal changes are, right? So I've been working on quantitative imaging, so T1 and T2 mapping in particular, where we do have the signal model that describes the temporal changes. So essentially, I've been not using a library, but computing one from the signal model. So you can take your signal model and evaluate how it could look like for a large set of these parameters, right? So you're creating your, say, your training data, if you like. And then at the time, it was a long time ago when I worked on that, but it was orthogonal matching pursuits at the time, just extracting a dictionary from the data. But that was like, I don't know, 2010 or so. There are many ways to do that. I think these days, I think the principle of having good data spread and extracting it is the start of that. And with models, this is easy. With other examples, like let's say for cardiac imaging, for example, right? So you want, like, everyone's heart beats a little bit different. So you don't want to learn a temporal function that's applied to everyone. So one of the strategies is to actually have adaptation. So there is extracting some of this information from the data itself. So there is a low resolution, low spatial resolution, I have to say, but high temporal resolution data that's measured for calibration. So it is again not an external dictionary, but it is something that's learned from the data itself. Thinking about others, I mean, there have been a lot of principal component analysis. So this type of let's say compression techniques that try to extract like a basis or lower dimensional space from the data that are in many cases very, very effective. Hope that answers more or less the question for the temporal dictionaries.
Yes, so Dr.
Yes, there is
Senthil
one more question. Chirag sir, are you reading that?
Yeah, please, madam, go ahead.
Okay, one more question from same attendee. Improving the efficiency and accuracy of cardiovascular magnetic resonance with artificial intelligence. Review of evidence and proposition of a roadmap to clinical translation. Can you give little bit about this?
I'm sorry, like I'm back, but my connection dropped out. Could you repeat?
Yeah. I repeat it again. Improving the efficiency and accuracy of cardiovascular magnetic resonance with artificial intelligence, review of evidence and proposition of a roadmap to clinical translation. Can you give some little bit more information about this?
About improving the efficiency of cardiac. Okay, yeah, of course. Again, like for cardiac, there are different different problems that can be addressed, right? So the one is going to it's okay. So the one is on the 2D side, right? Usually what we do today is we acquire data over multiple cardiac phases within a breath hold. So it is very exhausting for the patient. So they get in the scanner. There are few scans to actually do the planning, and in some cases, get the right orientation. And every time they have to hold their breath for something about 10 to 15 seconds and then scan again and scan again. And also the so one thing that will be, in terms of improving it, will be reducing this number of breath holds, right? So making it shorter overall, so getting all the data into fewer breath holds, and ideally getting rid of the breath holds at all, right? So being able to scan in free breathing. So that will be, I think, the goal towards the future. Now, this can be achieved with AI as one approach, and there has been a lot of work in this direction. And this will be getting towards what we call a single heartbeat acquisition. So we acquire all the data within a single heartbeat, and then we move towards different slice. So in this case, we can reduce from, let's say, 10 breath holds to maybe 2 or 3. Ideally, we can do it even better. There are approaches that also try to do it with free breathing, but it is more challenging because you might have still a lot of this, breathing together with a cardiac motion. So at some point, you're getting to the limit. How much can you extract from the data? So this is the one direction. I think the other direction is just getting rid of this planning altogether, because you have all of these individual scans, you have to plan, and this is just like getting a very long session. So you spend a lot of time into putting, ECG to the patient, instructing them, planning, and less to actual scanning. So another direction I think is having less planning, so having 3D scan, not slices, but having a 3D scan that captures everything in free breathing. I think that will be ideal if you go there, but it is challenging again because you have a lot of data, so like computationally this is a big problem, and also this data is inconsistent because we have two types of motion at the same time. We have the cardiac motion, we have the breathing motion, and we have to put them all together. So there is a lot of modeling going on, putting it all together. I see. Was it your questions that you turn your camera?
Professor, myself, Dr. Sendil Kumar.
Yeah.
Nowadays, Apple watches give 90% accuracy of ECG problems.
Mm-hmm.
How it will be differ from CMR? Why we need CMR? Nowadays, Apple phone watches, smart watches having this ECG 95%. They are telling 95% accuracy for that ECG reports, ECG problems.
Right.
So you are telling CMR. Nowadays, you are introducing CMR. How it will be differ? How much accuracy result we will get from CMR?
I think there's two different things, right? So the one is if you compare the watch, in terms of looking to your cardiac cycle, if you like, compared to ECG, right? And how much is the accuracy? So this is just telling you basically, what your pulse, your heartbeats, right? Whereas CMR is giving you the spatial information about the heart. It gives you the functional information, how the heart is moving. It gives you also the functional information about volume and so on. So you're getting much more additional information that you cannot get from ECG or the watch alone, right? So if I'm getting what your question is.
Okay, Professor.
Yeah?
Your session is very useful for me.
Yeah,
Future I will contact you. You can share your email and contact. I will contact you for
yes, yeah,
future queries. Thank you very much,
of course.
Professor, for your nice session. Thank you.
Anyone having another question? Shall we end this lecture or session?
Yeah, Ankit, please go ahead.
Okay. So thank you very much. It is a very informative session. Even I learned so many things because we only take the MRI image and do the machine learning and deep learning. But
Right.
how that image will be taken out, it is very helpful. And if it is not accurate, then we can't extract some information from that. So it is very informative session for me. So 1 second. This is a token of appreciation from our FDP side. Thank you very much to join the session, and it is very informative session.
Thank you so much.
Can you turn? Thank you. Can you turn on the camera for the photo session with the speaker?
Ankit, you can turn off your screen sharing so we can capture. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a nice
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.